This is Gareth Southgate, and this is the Three Lions podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Three Lions podcast. My name is Russell Osborne and this is an independent England football supporters podcast. It's one that aims to look at our England team from the past to the present and on occasions to the future. And it's not just the men, but the women too. But this episode, in the year of 2022, we are looking at the men. It is the year of the 22nd World Cup tournament. I've been looking back at how England have performed in previous years with the help of people who were there, either playing or supporting the team, either here in 1966 or across the world over the years. All those previous episodes can be found at threelionspodcast.com or your podcast provider of choice, and there are some real fascinating stories to be heard, going right back to the very first World Cups, to the first one England participated in 1950, when we won it, and all those times we've been knocked out. But this episode focuses in on the 16th tournament, known as a Coupe du Monde, France 98. After not qualifying for USA in 1994, England had to make amends and go to the next World Cup. One that couldn't be closer. France were awarded the tournament on the 2nd of July 1992, when once again the Executive Committee of FIFA met in Zurich, Switzerland. Initially, Switzerland showed interest in hosting, as did England, although we later withdrew once we were awarded the €96. Switzerland, well, they also withdrew as they decided they couldn't meet all of FIFA's requirements. That only left two bidding nations on the table, France and Morocco. You may remember there was a story about bribery and corruption surrounding the whole hosting process, and a certain Chuck Blazer, an American soccer administrator. It was considered France had bribed their way to hosting victory, although it was later determined it was Morocco, who ultimately failed in their bid, losing the vote 12-7. As hosts, France wouldn't have to qualify. Neither would holders Brazil, who had won it in America, thanks to Roberto Baggio's Italian penalty that went over the bar as that 94 final went to spot kicks. France 98 was a competition that had 32 nations compete in it. 4 from Asia, 5 from Africa, 3 from CONCACAF, 5 from South America, and 15 from Europe. The French would designate 9 cities and 10 stadiums to the competition, all of them needing a lot of finance and the building work to bring them all up to FIFA standard. It also broke ground and built a new stadium right from scratch that would eventually host the final, the Stade de France, just on the northern outskirts of Paris in the Saint-Denis area. It was started in 1995 and completed in November 1997. Those other host cities were Marseille, Lyon, Lens, Nantes, Saint-Étienne, Bordeaux and Montpellier. France, like Mexico and Italy had done, would host it for the second time, having first hosted it 60 years previous in 1938, when back then they hosted the third World Cup. England's qualification began with a new manager, Glenn Hoddle. Our semi-final defeat to Germany in Euro 96 was Terry Venables' last in charge, and that was regardless of how far England progressed. He'd already said it'd be his last. At the time, he was also involved in a court case that went back to his time with Tottenham Hotspur. And according to the Guardian newspaper, he's quoted as saying these court cases would interfere with the national side's efforts to qualify for the 1998 World Cup. So even before Euro 96 had begun, the FA had appointed Glenn Hoddle to take over. This regardless of how England performed in the tournament under Venables. England were drawn against Moldova, Georgia, old foes Poland and Italy in UEFA's Group 2. Hoddle's first match was away to Moldova, a match where he chose to bring David Beckham into the England fold and give him his debut. It was a qualification campaign that had no end of problems or incidents to deal with for Hoddle. Arsenal's Tony Adams was serving time at Her Majesty's pleasure in Chelmsford for drink driving. Rio Ferdinand had also been suspended for the same offence. Paul Gascoigne was front page news after he had admitted beating up his wife, Cheryl. Hoddle had to deal with various domestic abuse charities, insisting that he didn't pick Gaza, as it would set the wrong example. Shearer, Sheringham and Pearce were all injured at various points. And Diana, Princess of Wales, had died in a car crash in Paris some 11 days before a crucial home match against Moldova. The mood of the nation was sombre. England would beat Moldova away in September 96 3-0. In the same year, they'd beat Poland at home and Georgia away. February 97, Italy came to Wembley and beat us by 1-0. April and May, England played Georgia at home and Poland away, both 2-0 victories. September 97, England beat Moldova 4-0 at home. It then came down to the last game in October of 97. It was a group that was nip and tuck all the way, and England eventually sealed it with a Lions performance in Rome on the final day. It was 0-0. Interestingly, future England manager Roy Hodgson was part of the England setup in the lead up to that match. He would act as a secret agent, if you will, compiling a dossier on the Italians, having previously been manager of Inter Milan. He also acted as a translator to Hoddle whilst in Rome. Italy, well, they'd look to draws with Georgia and Poland as their downfall for not qualifying automatically. 2 days after that heroic match in Rome, Hoddle announced that his marriage had come to an end. Italy would eventually qualify after beating Russia in the playoffs. Croatia and Belgium would also come through this European pathway, as did the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, as they were known as at the time, after they beat Hungary 12-1 over 2 legs. With England qualified and the squad yet to be picked, Hoddle again became front page news with a left field selection, that of Eileen Drury, a faith healer. Drury was someone whom Hoddle had known since his playing time at Tottenham, first meeting her in 1976. In fact, she was the mother of an early girlfriend of his. When Hoddle's marriage unfolded, he'd go and live with Drury for almost a year. She wasn't picked to go to France, though, although later Hoddle admitted that perhaps he should have picked her. England would warm up for their big trip across the Channel with a shocking 0-0 draw at home to Saudi Arabia. Then 2 games in Morocco in a minor tournament called the Coupe Internationale Hassan II de Football. A 4-team tournament which featured England, France, Morocco and Belgium. Oddly, each team would only play 2 games. We didn't play France and Morocco didn't play Belgium. But in this little tournament, Michael Owen would score his first senior goal in a 1-0 victory over Morocco, and in doing so, became England's youngest ever goalscorer, beating Tommy Lawton's 50-year record. We then drew 0-0 with Belgium and lost 4-3 on penalties, and we'd finish runners-up in this little tournament behind France. It was only 2 days after his 31st birthday Paul Gascoigne would play his last England match in that game against Belgium. He was withdrawn after 50 minutes, a shadow of his former self. It was now that Hoddle had to select his 22. Each squad had to be announced by the 1st of June, with the tournament beginning on the 10th. Hoddle announced his on the 31st of May, a day that began with a massive earthquake in northern Afghanistan, leaving 5,000 dead. A day also when Geri Halliwell announced she was leaving the Spice Girls. It was a day that wasn't going to get any better for some. The 22 Hoddle picked would all play in the Premier League, and they were as follows. 3 goalkeepers: David Seaman of Arsenal, Nigel Martyn of Leeds United, Tim Flowers of Blackburn Rovers. Defenders: Sol Campbell of Tottenham Hotspur, Graham Lasseau, Chelsea, Tony Adams, Arsenal, Gareth Southgate, Aston Villa, Gary Neville of Manchester United, Martin Keown of Arsenal, Rio Ferdinand of West Ham United. In midfield, there was Paul Ince from Liverpool, David Beckham of Manchester United, David Batty, Newcastle United, Steve McManaman of Liverpool, Tottenham's Darren Anderton, who incidentally had only played 3 games that season, Paul Merson, who was at Middlesbrough, Paul Scholes of Manchester United, Rob Lee of Newcastle United, and then 4 up front, Alan Shearer as captain from Newcastle United, Teddy Sheringham, Manchester United, Les Ferdinand of Tottenham Hotspur, and Michael Owen of Liverpool. No Phil Neville, no Jamie Redknapp, no Ian Wright, who after that Italy game had publicly said to Hoddle, "Please pick me for the World Cup," but subsequently picked up a hamstring injury against Morocco. There was no Robbie Fowler, but the big one? No Paul Gascoigne. The reason Hoddle gave was he was unfit, but clearly there was more to it. His off-the-field antics had caught up with him, being caught in central London, late at night, kebab in hand. He was in the middle of a divorce. He was still drinking. His frame of mind just wasn't there, and Hoddle had to make that call. To say Gazza didn't take it well is a little of an understatement. The hotel room in which he called players into to tell them of their fate took a beating as Gascoigne kicked a chair, smashed a glass lamp, and Hoddle feared at one point that he would be next as the red mist came over Gaza. When it did come to June, England would base themselves on the Brittany coast of France, some 70 kilometres from Nantes, in a small village called Saint-André-des-Yeux. It would be in the same region as where Norway would base themselves. Now, if you're a regular listener to this series of shows, you'll know that I like to take a look at some of the little things that make the World Cup so special. The songs, the mascots, the posters. France 98 was no different. England's official World Cup song was by England United, called On Top of the World. England United were basically Ian McCulloch, frontman of Echo and the Bunnyman, Johnny Marr, guitarist from the Smiths. There were members of Space and Ocean Colour Scene also featuring, as did the Spice Girls. It reached number 9 in the UK charts. Frankly, it wasn't the best, as the 98 version of Three Lions and Vindaloo by Fat Les were much more catchy and terrace friendly. Keith Allen and Matt Lucas, they were Fat Les. Vindaloo was a song that had no real football credentials and a video that had very little football related footage. In fact, it parodied the Verve's Bittersweet Symphony. But I guess the theme to the summer was, of course, Dario G's Carnaval de Paris, a song that seemed to encapsulate every nation taking part. Footix was the mascot, a name that came about as a combination of football and ix, a common suffix with the French Gaul people. Footix was a cockerel, one of the national symbols of France. It was predominantly blue with a yellow face and red hair, with France 98 emblazoned across its puffed out chest. I remember it was on pretty much everything. You may remember there was a logo of a ball emerging over the curve of the world. This wasn't the actual poster. The poster was a colourful affair, but with no real direction. It was simply a bird's eye view of a stadium and a pitch with Coupe du Monde above and France 98 below. A little disappointing, in my opinion. So on we get to the TV soundtracks. The BBC went with a track called Pavane by French composer Gabriel Fauré. Set within a posh French restaurant, Parisian I'd assume, with famous World Cup moments set within the walls of the restaurant. It also featured stereotypical red wine and baguettes as part of its intro. ITV went with a more punchy intro with French instrumental artist Jean-Michel Jarre and his track Rendezvous. Again, like the BBC, there were all those French moments. The Tour de France, vineyards, boules, and all those iconic World Cup moments from years gone by, put to the music. Now here joining me to talk about that tournament in France is author of the book Lost in France, the story of England's 1998 World Cup. Please welcome to the Three Lions podcast, Mark Palmer. Hello, Mark.
Hello there. Good to see you, Russ. Yeah, not too bad.
Good stuff. This was your first book, wasn't it?
It was my first book. Yeah, it was. I think to be honest, what gave me the inspiration for it was reading the book about Italia 90. Did you read that?
I've read numerous ones on Italia 90, whether it was the same one.
which was amazing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that was Italia 90. And then, time you get to 1998, it was actually much harder to get sort of proper access to the players and that sort of thing. But I was quite fortunate. I would say I got sort of pretty good access to a lot of the players. I very much kind of worked with the press pack and then kind of diverted and then sort of joined the fans and that sort of thing. So so it was it was started off as a sort of travel log in some ways. But World Cups have always been for me that I could mark my life out in World Cups.
Yeah.
So it was a real sort of pleasure to do it and to turn it around, pretty swiftly.
Yeah.
The only other thing I'd say, Russell, is that the success of a book like that is only really as much as the success of the team in question. And I'm afraid that, I believe that actually that the England team in '98 and that particular last game against Argentina was one of the greatest games of all time from an England perspective. I think it was right up there with the England-Germany World Cup semi-final. Okay. And I think that I can't help but thinking that if somehow we'd got through and won that penalty shootout against Argentina, that we could actually have gone all the way, but we'll never know. No.
Well, we'll touch on Argentina, I'm sure, as we go along. But you say you were involved in the press pack, as it were. Just to bring us right up to date, you are now currently the travel editor for the Daily Mail, I believe.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So you were milling around all the players and the press conferences that were going on at the time. But I think before we touch on the actual World Cup and the tournament, there's two maybe issues that we maybe just ought to look back on. And first of them, I'd maybe just like to look back on was the ticket situation with the UK government, and I remember it being in the news quite a lot. What was your memories of that?
Well, my memory really was just that it was incredibly difficult to get tickets. There's always a row about how many tickets are allocated to each team. But I think that the reason it was such a problem was because France obviously is on our doorstep. And so it was always going to be obvious that thousands of people were going to make the trip, even for the first game, which was in Marseille, which is, as far away as you can get it basically in France. But so you were always going to get that problem. I think the second, so one was the venue was an issue. And secondly, I think the culture at that time was still pretty hostile. I think there was still a lot of elements, unfortunately, amongst the sort of traveling fans that went there, not really, perhaps just to sort of enjoy the football and the carnival, but for other reasons. And so I think those two things kind of came together and caused a massive problem.
Yeah, there was a lot of money supposedly spent on trying to stop people going and this whole identification checks, that sort of thing, was there?
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, that didn't work. And then you had the fans' representatives who were there, who sort of set up their own kind of office, if you like, in around sort of each venue. So it was a very difficult atmosphere, I have to say. And then of course in those days, still from the press point of view, you had the football writers, and then you had a lot of the news reporters who went out who they weren't looking for trouble, but certainly they were there to report on what was going on off the pitch. Right. So I think it was quite a kind of difficult atmosphere for everybody to manage.
Well, the other big moment, I guess, before the tournament took place was the exclusion of Paul Gascoigne.
Well, I have a history. I don't think I mentioned it very much in the book, but I have a kind of a history with Gazza, and I think incidentally that he's without doubt the most talented English footballer that I've ever seen, really, in terms of his ability to change the face of a game and everything. But when I was working, I was a new, kind of quite junior news reporter at the Sunday Telegraph at the time, and this was just after when he was at Tottenham and when he got transferred to Lazio, and I got to know Gascoigne's kind of financial advisor and things. He had two advisors really who I don't think actually advised him very well, but anyway. And I found out, they told me which hotel Gazza was going to be staying in when he went to Rome. Do you remember he was injured at the time? And
that's
he had
right.
A bit of rehabilitation. And they also told me which plane he was going to be on. And so I actually booked the same plane as Gazza and then booked the same hotel as Gazza.
Wow.
It's quite a small hotel. And I was actually the only journalist that was in this hotel. So Gazza and I spent quite a lot of time together. And we used to play chess in the evenings, and I became actually very fond of him, to be perfectly honest. And I realized how vulnerable he was. He wasn't drinking at the time. He was determined to get fit, and it was absolutely mad. There was like thousands of people outside this hotel, 24 hours a day, and he already had become a sort of a cult figure, and so I was really looking forward to, and then after, Euro 96, when he did really well, I still thought that, he had in him the ability to kind of take England one step further and to win us the World Cup. But as we all know, it all went sort of badly wrong in that lead up to the World Cup. And to be perfectly frank with you, I think Glenn Hoddle did probably the right thing in not taking him, because it just had spiraled out of control. But I still have got a lot of affection for Gazza.
I think we all have, haven't we? Yes. It's one of those ones, had he have gone, we'll never know, much like had we have beaten Argentina on penalties. But let's start at the beginning. You were driving around or taking trains all around France in just checking it all out before that first game in Marseille.
Yeah, I mean, the backdrop to that is that I was actually working at the Daily Express at the time, and I just got sacked. The new editor came in. I had quite a senior position on the paper, and a new editor came in, new owner actually as well, and so I was sacked basically. But I had this book already lined up and had a publisher and everything, so it was actually quite therapeutic just to sort of get in the car and drive to well, first of all to Marseille, and kind of pivotal to the book in a way was when I picked up these two guys, or I think they were going by train or whatever, and I kind of drove them to a lot of venues and got to understand through them, what it really meant to be an England fan. I think one of them had tickets, the other didn't, and how hard it was to get tickets and that sort of thing. And so I sort of traveled around and stayed sometimes in little sort of B&Bs, or sometimes I camped, sometimes I slept in the car. So I was doing it off my own bat in that way, and but it was a wonderful experience.
Well, let's start in Marseille. Obviously, it's known for the trouble that occurred there, and England fans either getting caught up in it or being involved in it. Were you there? What was your experience of it?
Yeah, I was there. And the day of the first game, even the night before, it was very hot, and there was just a nasty atmosphere, unfortunately, all around the harbour in Marseille, and people, they're drinking. I think they kind of tried to water down the beer, but it didn't really work. And then, of course, there was the sort of the Algerian influence in Marseille, and I think it brought out a very horrible side of the sort of, I don't know, something to do with the British psyche or whatever it was, and there was that feeling of being a kind of invading army and all of that, and then you can argue it both ways. You could say that the police then started to sort of panic a little bit and got heavy-handed and overreacted. On the other hand, glasses started to be thrown, bottles started to be thrown. There was sort of a lot of sort of racist chanting and that sort of thing. And then I went up to the Glenn Hoddle's interview before the first game, and the players were sort of going through their last sort of training thing. And that was when we heard that it all just sort of gone off back in the town centre. And so I kind of went back into town, and honestly, I was frightened. I felt sort of, particularly because I don't know if that point, because I had accreditation as a kind of member of the press, which got me the access that I kind of wanted. And so I don't know whether it was because I had a kind of thing around my neck or something. And there was definitely in those days, a lot of English fans didn't trust the press, right or wrong. And so they singled out the press and would give you a right going over if they knew who you were. So I did. I felt actually very. I felt very. Felt quite sort of frightened by and disappointed and embarrassed in a way, because I don't know if you know Marseille, but it's a beautiful city, and basically it wasn't a beautiful city. 24. For sort of 48 hours during that game.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've only been to Marseille once, and that was the second time that England played there during the 2016 Euros, when unfortunately there was more trouble there. But moving on to the game, I remember where I was for this. I was watching it in the pub back home, and it was a midday kickoff, and I remember like the BBC it was either BBC or ITV showing it midday, almost. Really hot, blazing sun down there on a sort of sweltering afternoon, but England got the job done, didn't they?
Yeah, well, they did. I think that I think the first thing to say is that there was getting to the World Cup. England getting to that World Cup required as you know, that going to Rome and coming away with a result of some kind against Italy, and that was an incredible game. And a lot of people think that was Gazza's best game. Ian Wright played that game, hit the post, I think, and it was a terrific performance. So I think going into the World Cup, I think the mood was pretty optimistic. There was already before that first game, there was already a debate about whether Shearer and Owen should play together, and so that was going on. But it was a very hot day, and it was, as you say, I think it was a sort of. Was it a sort of 2:00 kickoff or something like that? Or something like that. And Shearer scored, so England were up and running. I don't think anybody would say it was I think, as you say, it was job done, but I don't think anybody would say that was a sort of vintage performance. No.
So it was an ideal start to a World Cup campaign to get 3 points on the board.
Yeah.
You say about Owen, there was also the situation with Beckham as well. Both were young, both were eager to be involved, and from what I can gather, that the press were hounding Hoddle to get him to play them and involve them, but he was reluctant early.
Yes, he was. Hoddle was an interesting character, actually, and he didn't always have the best sort of relationship with the press, and I think that he was very different, for example, from Terry Venables, who was a different sort of character in some ways, but he played his cards very, very close to his chest. He never would really be drawn about why he wasn't playing certain people, and there was that, as you rightly say, there was that sort of ongoing issue all the way through as to why didn't he actually just play the players who were in form. But I think all managers, don't they? They all have their kind of favourites or people they think they can rely on, and it was no different with Hoddle. Although, I don't know whether you listen, Russell, to Hoddle now and his analysis when he's doing he's a pundit. And I think he's hopeless now and says the most obvious things. But at the time, and I thought actually that he was tactically, he was very good. And we'll come on to the Argentina game later, where actually I think he played a blinder. So when it comes to Hoddle, I think he had his issues, but fundamentally, and it also helped, I think, that, and it was often the case when you watched England in training during that World Cup, and sometimes that the ball would come to Hoddle, and he would just sort of take it on his chest or his thigh, and he'd sort of juggle around with it, and he was still absolutely brilliant in that respect.
Sort of showing them that he hadn't lost it.
Well, exactly, yeah. And kind of, don't you criticize me because I can still do it, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, after the Marseille game, it was on to Toulouse, where they would place Romania. And I think there was a nice little story in the book where I think it was in between these two places, where you had a little bit of trouble at a toll booth or a toll gate with your car.
Where it was. I don't remember that, Russell. I'm gonna have to look at that up.
Let me remind you. Your car started to roll away.
Oh my God! Did it really? Where did it go?
It was rolling down the road, apparently.
How did we stop it?
I think you ran after it and put your hand through the window and pulled the handbrake up as it was rolling away as people were seeing this runaway car.
Runaway car. God, was I on my own or did I have my two lads with me?
Maybe that'll come back to you. But going on to Toulouse. And was Toulouse one of the places where there was an alcohol ban?
Well, I think Toulouse had the beer tents. I don't think there was an alcohol ban.
No.
But Toulouse has the biggest square, I think, of any city in Europe, and again, it's a wonderful city, and I think that's part of the pleasure of following England is you get to see these sort of these great places. I don't think there was an alcohol ban, but you could be right. But I don't remember that. I just do remember all these kind of beer tents and plastic glasses and that sort of thing.
Well, unfortunately, England lost in Romania, so that momentum after beating Tunisia was stopped. What do you remember the feeling after that?
Well, I just think there was a feeling after that of there's always just kind of a sort of inquisition and that sort of thing, and at the same time, I think it concentrated the mind, and then everybody knew what had to happen after that. I mean, Romania were they were a good side, and but you were saying that you get off to a good start when you win your first game. Conversely, in 1966 when England won the World Cup, they didn't win their first game, and sometimes some teams start slowly. So maybe we should have played Romania first. I don't know.
Maybe you're right. I mean, because everyone had their eyes on the other group, which consisted of Japan, Jamaica, Croatia, and Argentina, and it would be a case of whoever finished top of England's Group G would face the second place in Group H, and then vice versa. Second in Group H would play top of Group G. But the last game to determine who would finish it was against Colombia, and this was where Hoddle decided that he would introduce Beckham and Owen. Yeah,
so there'd been a growing sort of argy-bargy about Beckham, and it went back, I think I recall, to Hoddle being less than complimentary, and then getting Beckham after he didn't play in the last game to do an interview, to the press and everything else. And Beckham, was a young kid really at that stage. And then Alex Ferguson, he waded in, didn't he? And was saying that's no way to treat Beckham, and did his confidence no good. And then by this stage, which always happens, the England manager and the press, there's this sort of growing tension, and it always comes down to the point where the England manager, almost whoever it is, perhaps not Terry Venables, but starts to sort of blame, the press and kind of almost thinking that the press wants us to fail. And where, from my experience, completely the opposite is the case, that the press want England to do really well, not least because it means that it keeps the story going, you can stay out there longer and everything else. So we had then the growing Beckham issue leading up to the Colombia game, and then we also had should you be playing both Owen and Shearer rather than having sort of Owen as a substitute, and so those are the two sort of issues really. And then as we get into the Colombia game, the reason the atmosphere was, I think, so amazing was because obviously it's a very close. It's just hop over the channel, and then a couple of hours or whatever, and then you're in Lens. So it was a terrific atmosphere and a great sort of build up.
Nice little tight sort of English ground as much, but England. Well, we won the game. Anderton scored, and Beckham. All that build up. Should he play? Will he play? Hoddle finally gives him the green light to play. Scored a fantastic free kick.
Exactly, and so I suppose that was crucial. That and I think also the Shearer. I think who was it? Was it Anderton that was dropped? Oh, that's right, Sheringham, wasn't it? The big thing was that Hoddle he liked Sheringham very much and everything else, but Sheringham actually was he on the bench, or he didn't play it at all, I don't think, and Owen and Shearer did and did well, and so then but the other thing is, Russell, that so I think, did we top the group? I forget now.
No, we actually finished second in the group.
Second, okay, but which meant that then, and we knew then, didn't we, that we were going to play Argentina as opposed to, was it playing Croatia? Am I right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So if we hadn't lost the second game, and then we did probably need to do the top of the group, which is interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes by topping the group, you end up having a worse draw than coming runners up.
Yeah, I mean, incidentally, Croatia, they were in their first ever World Cup and would go on to make the semi-final there.
Right.
So you never really know.
You never really know.
No, I mean, just touching on, obviously we've spoken about the issues that sort of first happened in Marseille and the opening game, but there was also some trouble with German hooligans, also in Lens. Apparently this was shortly before England arrived in Lens for this game. A French policeman was unfortunately beaten up,
right.
I read.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think it was always sort of flagged out that these Germans were going to just come and cause trouble. I mean, it was kind of almost like a sort of tribal thing. It was pretty unpleasant. But I think actually in that game though, the England fans behaved quite well, didn't they? I think.
I believe so.
And there wasn't too much trouble. And unlike in Marseille, where there was a lot of people there that on both sides, that sort of went there with the wrong intentions. I don't think that was primarily the case in Lens.
Yeah. Well, we got past Colombia, and as you say, we were then second place in the group. Argentina were the opponents in the round of 16. Of course, 12 years since they dumped us out of Mexico, courtesy of Maradona and his golden hand, golden foot, whatever way you want to look at it, unfortunately. But Argentina were the opponents again. St. Etienne, what were your memories in the build-up to that?
Well, St. Etienne is very near Lyon, of course, isn't it? And it was a small little sort of French town, nice square. The weather was fantastic. Immediately, you realize this is going to be a massive game, and I think some of us thought that when you look at that side on paper, even now, that was a good team. There were some very, very good players. There was a mixture of experience and youth and everything. And I think there was a feeling that if somehow we could get through that game, that we could really kind of go all the way. There was that feeling of tremendous sort of anticipation. And just as a side note, I called up a friend of mine called Chris. We were at school together, and he was the captain of our team. He was a great player. I said, Chris, look, I think you've really just got to get yourself over here. And he just got married and just had a child, just started a new job and just moved into a home. And he said, give me 10 minutes. And then 10 minutes later, he phoned me back and he said, I'll be at the Gare du Nord, arriving at 10 o'clock the day before the game. So I came down from Lens to Paris, picked him up at 10 o'clock. And by sort of late lunchtime, we were in Saint Etienne. Of course, he didn't have a ticket. That was the one thing. And there was, I think, as we discussed before, there was throughout that whole World Cup that it was because it was so France close to Britain and all that. So many people went without a ticket. My kind of recollection of the build-up was primarily kind of on his behalf, worrying how on earth he's come all this way. Is he actually going to get into the ground? And I told him that I thought he's going to have to pay about sort of £200, which I guess is about equivalent to what, £300 or £400 in today's money.
Yeah.
And so he didn't seem particularly sort of worried about it. And so on the morning of the game, we went and had a fantastic lunch somewhere. And then after lunch, fortified by the local wine or whatever, he went out on the street and he actually got a ticket. I think he got a ticket for £150 or something like that. And so he got into the stadium. And then what I recall is just in the square again, there was a good atmosphere. And just again, the English fans kind of took it over, and then a kind of slow procession towards the stadium. I think I'm right in saying it was it was certainly an evening kickoff. I don't know whether it was sort of 7:30 or 5:30. I'm not quite sure, but there was a fair number of Argentinians there as well, which I thought was interesting. It was you knew it was going to be a proper football match, but didn't quite realize it was going to be quite the drama that it turned out to be.
Well, I mean, for £150, he certainly got his money's worth for entertainment, because, I mean, some would say that was the game of the tournament. I mean, for the first 45 minutes, it was entertainment all the way, regardless of what nation you were supporting, because it started with 2 penalties, wasn't it? Batistuta scored one for Argentina, then Shearer got one for England.
Yeah.
You in the book, you mentioned that there was a little bit of trouble in the stands. I think that's possibly where there was maybe both sets of supporters with, I don't know, black market tickets integrating with each other.
Yeah, I think so. And then came the
Then England, 6 minutes later, then came the moment of the World Cup, the moment of the game, the moment of quite possibly Michael Owen's life.
Yeah, exactly. Paddy Barclay, who was then, was he writing for the Telegraph, or he described it as a kind of apostolic moment, and that just a sort of unbelievable experience of watching this because Michael Owen, what was he? Was he 18 at that point? Yeah, something like that?
Yeah.
And an incredible pass from David Beckham, to be fair. And then for Owen to take it, just, to bring it under control, and then he just did what, but you're absolutely right. I mean, that was probably Owen's greatest moment wearing an England shirt, sadly, and he just sort of went past 4 Argentinians and then still had quite a lot to do to beat the keeper. And it was just a euphoric moment. It was like watching something of great beauty.
Yeah, I'm guessing that being there, you against Argentina, knowing how important it was and in hindsight could have been, but even now we look back on it and it's just a magnificent goal for someone of his age, to have that much confidence, and as well to Hoddle hadn't really sort of shown the faith in him leading up to it, but he like Beckham in the game previous sort of showed him, look, this is what you're missing. This is what I can do.
Absolutely. And I think there was a feeling after that goal that, one had to sort of pinch oneself to think that, it was gonna stay like that.
Yeah, I mean, because just before half time, it was a really clever free kick that Argentina equalised with. There was a lot of sort of tippy-tappy around the box, and I think Batistuta was involved, right. and Zanetti put it in. Yeah.
So then we were at 2-2, weren't we?
At half time, before the real drama happened. Again, and we say that Michael Owen's life changed then. It could arguably be said that David Beckham's life changed in that second half.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he was, it was a terrible moment, but it also, who was it? Was it bad? Who was it that he kicked?
Was it Simeone or Pochettino? Simeone, I think.
Simeone, and who kind of, he just, I guess Beckham sort of fell for it. It wasn't a kick, was it really? I mean, just brought his leg up, and but I suppose, technically speaking, it was a foul, and off he goes. And yeah, you're right. Then after that was when Beckham had to endure the most extraordinary amount of abuse, didn't he? And everything. So off he goes, and then we're down to 10 men. And this is where I think, in my view, that Glenn Hoddle showed that he was actually a very good manager. There was a lot of other stuff going on off the field and everything else, but we were down to 10 men, but still somehow he made the team believe that they could still win. And the way he rotated Shearer and Owen every 15 minutes, so that one came back playing right back, almost like 5-man defense, just one man up front, and just and kept it going for the rest of that half and for the whole of extra time, which was an unbelievable achievement. And then of course then we had the extraordinary drama of Sol Campbell scoring what most of us thought was a perfectly legitimate
yes.
goal.
Well, this was the thing. He scored from, I believe, a header, which was ultimately disallowed because I think Shearer had impeded someone. The England players were celebrating. The Danish referee, Kim Morten Nielsen, had disallowed it, blown his whistle, and the Argentinians had got on with the game whilst half the England team were still celebrating.
Exactly. And they went down the other end and very nearly scored themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was Veron, wasn't it? It was back down the other end. We had it that, or I read somewhere that it was at that point that the Queen was actually watching that game.
Was she?
And, yeah, apparently. And apparently it was at that point that she actually shouted at the television.
I can't imagine Her Majesty doing that.
Oh, I know.
Mind you, we were all doing the same.
We were. And I mean, you could. I remember that I'm not really a smoker, but I just got to work my way through a unfiltered packet of Gitan cigarettes by that. So, you were allowed to smoke in the stadium then.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the English fan, the Great Escape sort of theme tune was coming up, and then I think Simeone was substituted at the start of extra time, I think, and Veron, took up the armband. And anyway, we got to the penalty shootout.
Yeah, got to the penalties. I mean, and everyone immediately thinks back to 1990 to 1996, and then it is 1998 penalties against Argentina. I think immediately Seaman saved one. I think.
Yeah, that's right. We had three experienced penalty takers on the pitch. I think we had Shearer, Owen, very young, and Paul Merson.
Yes.
And Anderton would have probably taken the fourth one, but he had come off and he was replaced by David Batty. And Argentina, I think, had at least six kind of recognized penalty takers. It was, anyway. And then at the beginning of the book, I went to the Liverpool training ground, and Paul Ince, we sat in his car actually, and which for about an hour, and he was charming, and that was when I asked him about, if it ever came to it, how he'd feel taking a penalty, and he was very honest and said that he would take one, but he'd rather not. And I just remember as he walked towards taking his penalty, just so wanting him to, but knowing that there were obviously doubts in his mind, and his penalty was a very poor one, so that let Argentina back into it really. After Seaman had saved one, and then of course it was David Batty then who missed the last one, wasn't it?
He'd never taken a penalty before, I believe.
Had he not?
No, it was a very strange decision.
Yeah.
Ultimately, another penalty shootout, another time that England were out. But your journey following the World Cup didn't end there, did it?
No. So then I kind of abandoned Chris, and I then got a plane back to La Boule, where England were based.
Yeah. Because
I wanted to hear, what Hoddle had to say about the whole thing, and so I left the car at the airport and flew back, and then had to get the train back, and it was pretty grim and pretty sort of funereal, really. And Hoddle's press conference was very downbeat and that sort of thing. And the brutal truth was that England had only played 4 games. I mean, it felt more than that because of that last game being such a sort of iconic encounter between England and Argentina. But in reality, we didn't get much further than the first proper round.
No, you're right. At the beginning of the tournament in the book, you wrote that France as a nation were perhaps a little disinterested in the whole thing, but as soon as they started going through the rounds, the interest there really started to build, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. And it was, you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't know. I mean, France is a funny old country, funny old people, and big in their rugby and all that. By the end, I mean, then, Paris and then the Champs-Élysées and everything else. Yeah, they really, really did get into it. And I think, looking back on it, you would say that it was a fantastic tournament, and it was well run, really. And it's always pretty amazing when the home nation wins, to justify all that expense and organisation and everything.
Yeah, very true, very true. Back then, when Hoddle was doing his post-match or sort of conference that you went to see, did you get the impression that his time would be up very soon because he would only have 4 more games? Yeah,
no, I didn't really. As you know, that then this whole business about him writing his, this diary, and David Davis sort of helping him, and that, there'd been this sort of auction, and I think the figure was like £250,000 was bandied about, and then sympathy for Hoddle at that point it vanished really.
Yeah.
I think I said in the book it was like watching a classroom sort of suddenly becoming a sort of playground brawl, because there had been this tension with the media, and now the media felt sort of they were vindicated in a way, because Hoddle hadn't always played perhaps with a straight bat and hadn't really sort of explained, been open enough, and then transpires that he wasn't being open at all, and that in fact he was, writing his own sort of book, which was going to sell a lot of money and that sort of thing. So yeah, it was an unfortunate end.
Mm. And by chance as well, reading, I think it was very much towards the end of the book, Roy Hodgson, his name was mentioned almost 10, 12, 14 years before he would actually become England manager. And I think you wrote something, what was it? How do we know that Roy Hodgson would make a better England manager than Glenn Hoddle? He might be less infuriating, but that's another matter. I mean, he was obviously on the scene back then. I know he was in charge of Switzerland, I believe, at one stage.
Yeah, he was in charge of Switzerland, and I don't know if I mentioned in the book, but I always had a soft spot for Roy Hodgson, actually. Although I don't think he was ever going to be a great England manager, but I think that if you talk to a Crystal Palace fan, they'd say that he was a great Crystal Palace manager, and but when he was, I was working for the Telegraph at the time, and he was the manager of Switzerland, and it was that World Cup which England didn't qualify for. So we're looking at 94. You're absolutely right. And I went out and to interview him, and we went and had lunch, and he was just so charming. And afterwards, he said, this was in Zurich, and he said, do you know Zurich? And I said, I don't actually, but I'm going to have a little wander around later. And he said, well, would you like me to drive you around? So I got us a conducted tour of Zurich by Roy Hodgson for
lovely
5 minutes. So I've always had a soft spot for him.
Oh, nice one. The book Lost in France, okay, it's a fairly old now, obviously, the story of the 98 World Cup. It's still available. It is a great read. But Mark, thank you very much for just giving us an insight into that time ago and another of England's World Cups.
Well, thank you very much, Russell, for having me. And it's been a great pleasure. And you're absolutely right. Some time ago, which is why the memory is a little bit foggy on some of the detail.
It's all good. I mean, fortunately, we've got the likes of YouTube as well that we can relive it all should we want to.
Great. Good. Thanks very much.
My thanks go to Mark Palmer there for his memories of that tournament. As England departed the competition, the hosts France were making headways for Paris and the final, sitting off Paraguay, Italy and Croatia to get there. Brazil also had their eyes on the prize, not wanting to relinquish it after winning it in USA 4 years earlier. They had beaten Chile, Denmark and the Dutch to meet the hosts in the final. And along the way, the Netherlands had put Argentina out with a spectacular Dennis Bergkamp strike. Now, before the showpiece occasion, there was confusion surrounding Brazil's Ronaldo. He had been omitted from the starting lineup handed into a FIFA official 45 minutes before kickoff, only for him to be reinstated. It's been said that he suffered a convulsion in the lead up to the game. The pressure mounted on him as a 21-year-old was immense. He would, however, go on to win the Golden Ball as player of the tournament and go on to have a glittering career playing for the likes of Inter Milan and Real Madrid. But as for the final, that was one-way traffic. France, they ran out 3-0 winners thanks to 2 goals from Zinedine Zidane and 1 right at the end from Emmanuel Petit. The 16th World Cup was over. The next one would be held in the Far East for the very first time. It is one I have very fond memories of, and I'll be looking back and explaining why very soon. I hope you can join me for it. My name has been Russell Osborne. This is the Three Lions podcast. You can find out all about it on the social media channels. Just search Three Lions podcast. Give it a follow there. And all the previous World Cup episodes can be found at your podcast provider of choice. Feel free to go back, tune in to ones that maybe you haven't heard before. It'd be great to have you along for them. And indeed, for the next edition too. So until then, take care, look after yourselves. Cheers.